president of ORC, which is the open rule for cataloging. And we are a new open project. We're not in OLF as of yet, although that's one of the things I might be interested to have a discussion about as to whether it would make sense for us to join OLF. We're considering becoming an incubation project. We are writing cataloging rules because we think cataloging rules should be open and free and understandable by humans. And so we're writing our own set of cataloging rules. And we have a bunch of volunteers who are working on that. And so far, we only have one, we have the series rule.
Do you want to share your screen?
Am I not sharing my screen? Oh,
No.
I don't know. That is a good idea. Share screen over here. Can you hear on Zoom? Ah, someone says they can't hear on Zoom.
I was asking you.
Oh, share screen.
Got
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. There we go. We have Zoom people. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so we have this one section is done, or is draft anyway. The draft is completed, and that's the series section. I don't know why we started with series. I wasn't involved when the decision was made. But it's a good, I guess it's relatively small. It kind of gives an example, it sets the structure of what is kind of going on. And so the plan for the other rules will follow this. We're right now only doing books. We're writing rules for describing books. So it is a relatively small bite to chew off, I think, at this point, although at some point we'll move on to other formats. The edition rule is almost ready to go out, and the title rule is in process. So they're moving along, and we're getting more people. And we're at the point where probably after they finish the title rule, we'll split into two committees writing rules, working on, someone will work on imprint, someone will work on material description, and they'll have two teams working simultaneously so we can get there faster. And basically, we are very unhappy with the current cataloging rule regime. It seems to have gotten too expensive for a lot of libraries and incomprehensible for pretty much all the librarians I know. And so we think there need to be rules that we can afford and that we can understand. And we're kind of going back. We're taking things back to the point where things went off the rails. So we're not dealing with linked data or lots of other issues that people are dealing with, kind of trying to get a firm grounding before we move into other weirdness. If it's possible to do that, without getting into the same situation, and it may not be possible. Some of those things may not be possible to do without becoming what we're avoiding being. So it's a pretty simple situation. Will give out, I have cards which have a QR code to our website, which is this thing I'm looking at, which is this very weird URL.
Would you also mind copying it and putting it in the chat for the folks?
Oh, that is an excellent idea. Copy the URL, because the URL is this bizarre free GitHub thing we've got, and that's one of the things we need to deal with at some point. There's a chat. One of the things we need to deal with at some point is we need to get a real website, but right now we're like, we need a bank account. We need like insurance and stuff. So we're dealing with, we're kind of dealing with things one at a time. So I don't know if people want to, actually get into what, our rules, what the rules say. I don't know how detailed anybody wants to get. And we could look at the drafts. Yes,
So it would be interesting to go into more details of the specifics of parts of the problems you're trying to address. So one is, open as opposed to closed and for pay, presumably.
yeah.
But do you, for example, imagine creating rules that are, worldwide applicable, whereas there is perhaps a proliferation of different rule sets in different places at the moment,
That is the sort of thing that is, kind of on the horizon, but not something we are dealing with. We're trying to deal with what, is kind of directly in front of us. And I'm thinking that as this grows, as the organization grows, we get more people, we can find people from other countries and other languages who are interested in this same problem, which I think we may. We're definitely willing to move in that direction, but it's not something we have capacity to do now.
So how is the group organized? And how do you sort of divide up the work?
We're a 501c3 organization. We have a board of directors, which are me and we've listed on a committee executive board right here. So we have a president, vice president-elect, and a past president structure, a secretary and treasurer. So the president-elect is Julie Moore from Cal State Fresno. Past president is Denise Scopey from Chapel Hill. And then we have Amy Hitchner from Colorado State Library and Eric Willie as a treasurer from Illinois State. And then we have the rule writing committee. Amy Hitchner is actually leading the rule writing committee also. And when we start a second rule writing committee, that's going to be run by a person whose name I can't remember from 5 colleges, who is also very involved in this. And so we're going to have 2 rule writing leads. And then the people actually on the committee are mostly just working librarians, working catalogers. One of them is teaching cataloging at a library school, but mostly they're working catalogers, and we're doing this with working catalogers in mind. That just regular working catalogers need rules that they can understand and that their library can afford to access. And so that's what we're doing.
And how did you find each other?
It's been a slow process. There's been there's a email list, it's a Google group, which has been kind of collecting people for several years now, since at least 2017 or something like that. That's been just sort of talking about this and saying we should do this until it's kind of got a critical mass of people in the Google group. Together, and then we said, okay, let's actually do it. And last year they set up the 501c3, so that actually became a real thing the first time, which I then took over as president of, and now we're kind of trying to push this thing forward.
Any other questions?
So you're basing the rules on existing rules or?
We are looking to out of copyright sources, like the LCRIs, like the IFLA. We have a page about that. And older rules, we're looking at older rules like the 49 rules from Library of Congress, 1949 rules from Library of Congress, which are government work product and therefore out of copyright, and the ALA rules from 1909, which are interesting. There's something in the 1909 rules, bastard title, and so, you know, kind of like, let's update the language and
Concept may be good.
Yeah, don't you think, but
yes, exactly. So, you know, we are definitely cribbing from some of those other sources that are available in the open domain.
Great. Thank you, Lloyd.
Yes,
So, in my way, which I probably won't in the future, the library community would ditch Mark pretty quickly and move to BitFrame. You noted in your intro page up there that you know, were predominantly in Mark, but with a view to other things. You know, how would such a transition impact the record?
we are not writing a MARC manual. We tell ourselves that frequently while we're working on the rules, where you have to say, okay, this is not a MARC manual. We're writing cataloging rules. We are doing our examples in MARC format, mostly because that's what those of us on the committee are familiar with. I think it's a case of, if we get members who are familiar with BibFrame and can create examples of the same rules, how they would fit into BibFrame, we'd be happy with that. We are not at this point trying to accommodate linked data or anything like that. I think that is, like I said, we have to kind of get a firm footing before we can go back in that direction.
Yeah, you know, I hear where you're coming from, and it's a very practical approach. I think, you know, I have a feeling that if you were in on the ground floor with an open solution for a new environment, that could in the long term be extremely impactful for the effort given, because you could set the tone, and if people are looking, I actually don't know whether there's a set of rules written for BitFrame at the moment. But if there isn't, that seems like an enormous opportunity. You can find the right people who are interested in doing that within this framework.
Yeah, and I think if we could find people who know BibFrame,
Yeah,
that would be actually really interesting.
and you know, BitFrame and art are very similar, right? If you convert backwards,
Exactly.
then they're essentially the same as
Mhm.
so, you know, even if it were, say, to focus on the literal fields in BibFrame rather than perhaps the rules for linking or something, which perhaps would be stretching expertise, then perhaps greater parallel or greater opportunity for making headway. I don't know.
I think that's definitely a possibility. That's definitely something we should be thinking about, and that's an interesting point, that BibFrame is in its infancy, and it may be more open to change. Something to think about. So what I guess, one thing I would actually be interested in having a discussion of is if people think we should be in OLF. Because we kind of explored OLF, and the things that we get from OLF, we kind of already have, 501c3. You know, we're setting up our banking arrangements and setting up to do fundraising. And I'm not sure, we're all kind of all not sure exactly what we get out of joining OLF at this point. And we are running on a shoestring. The $1,000 it would cost to become a real OLF member would actually be probably the largest single expense.
The benefit, hearing what you were saying earlier about having, getting your beginnings from a Google Doc. The benefit I could see would be more around outreach and get an engagement and getting more people involved. Since the OLF has a structure in place, has a website that people recognize and come to learn more about, has a newsletter where we send out regular announcements and has like social media presence, it might be a way for you to grow the group.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Exposure.
Yeah,
I mean, we've been thinking kind of it would lend legitimacy to what we're doing. I think that's part of it. But exposure is actually would be a good point, yeah. Because we definitely need more folks. We need somebody who knows the different.
right. And there are folks in the foundation community who do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, that's what I've got. I don't know, you wanna
Thank you so much.
take over there?
We're gonna go next.
No, it's the web.
Alright.
No, delay.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
And this isn't gonna be super nuts and bolts, but it's an overview.
Alright, so
Okay.
let's get you stop sharing. You
I
good?
did stop sharing,
Perfect.
but I'll leave the Zoom running. Here. Take the part of the website here. Give that to your catalog. I will do so.
Good. Let's get rid of that. And so I am here today to talk about, how at Cornell University, we are delivering terms of use links.
Let's.
That I cannot see.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my machine.
So what we need is this.
Close my browser.
Yeah.
And then if we just make Win full screen.
Yeah. There we are. Okay.
Talking about how we get these terms of use links in our Blacklight catalog. So in a way that theoretically would be replicable in other environments. We've done these, we've had these through several, in our Voyager universe of library staff tools and previous e-resource management tool. And so it was a piece of our implementation that we needed to sort of maintain. And we've actually got a nice elegant solution that uses the folio APIs and some work with EBSCO to feed, when we get MARC records from our knowledge base, to populate a few fields with some of their secret codes that are behind, not secret codes, but the codes that represent the different records from the EBSCO knowledge base. So I'll see how that sort of fits together or show how that fits together and what this does. But at its heart, so this is a journal record. This journal is part of a package of journals that is represented in our knowledge base. It's from an Elsevier back file in this case. And so if I click this terms of use link, I will get this page that has some selected terms of use laid out in a reasonably neat format, but trying to explain things that users and or library staff might be interested in seeing. It's not every single part of our license. It's not necessarily the exact language from the license, but it's sort of translated into user-friendly terms. But so, can you do ILL? Yes. But our Elsevier agreement has this slight extra phrase because we have a campus in Qatar. Normally the Elsevier agreements say it's limited to the country you're in. And we got them to make an exception. And actually this is now out of date because our new agreement with Neural from 3 years ago opens up international interlibrary anyway. So we got to figure out a new statement for that. With our current setup, if I were to go in and edit that in the license agreement, which I'm not going to do today, it would show up momentarily after. Generally, our license terms aren't something that needs to be live real-time updates, but in this case, maybe it would. And then a few others. We can choose the terms that we've articulated in Folio to appear here. We also, in some cases, I think our Blacklight, the people that maintain our Blacklight have just sort of translated some of the terminology from what might be getting fed to it from Folio into some standard language. But for the most part, these words all appear in our Folio license. But how it works is behind the scenes. This is the marked view from our Blacklight catalog. There are these codes that appear in various places. This 83305, I believe, represents this title within the EBSCO knowledge base. And so this 83305 is actually a title within a package within this provider, Elsevier. There's a couple other codes we've loaded in, but I think it's this one, the subfield I from 856 field, that's the one the API uses. And it sends that, so the API call sends that to Folio, where it looks for, is this code in any of these packages attached to any agreement? The response that comes back says, yes, it's attached to one or more agreements. Here are their agreement IDs. And so in this case, we made an Elsevier Science Perpetual Access Journal Archives agreement in Folio, and we've attached all of our Perpetual Access Journal Archive knowledge base entries from eHoldings or from the EBSCO knowledge base to it. And then there is a license agreement attached to this, that same API call can return the license terms from. And I will navigate to that here. Way down at the bottom, controlling license. So basically, whichever license appears to be the one in charge at the time has a record in Folio that we've articulated all those terms here. And in Folio, we can make custom terms. We can reword how these work. This trigger visibility or not gives a lot of resource staff some say over what's going to appear or not, because that value appears in the API return call, and then the Blacklight maintainers can decide whether to ignore it or use that value to decide whether to display that term. But so the terms are all articulated here. They get fetched with that ID that's in the mark record, and it all works great. And then just a quick aside, so EBSCO admin, which is where people that just have EDS but not Folio eHoldings would go in to activate content, to have it show up in EBSCO Discovery, the link resolver, the journal list, all that kind of good stuff. In Folio, though, we've got the eHoldings app. So my staff can simply attach, in this case, it would be this science back file, immunology, microbiology, gets attached to that agreement record, so that all those linkages, the different codes, map from that API call to the license terms that we're it's pretty neat, actually, but it's the first time we've been able to actually just have like a live API call for this part of it. I don't know how much this gets used. Our ILL staff use it pretty regularly. Because they're searching the catalog, do we have this thing? Oh, yes, we do. Which years are we looking for? And then which of these providers has it for that year? And can we lend it? Is the question they're asking. Whether users are looking at it, I'm not sure, but course reserve staff, some reference staff will, if somebody's there asking like, what can I do with this? So it's primarily a staff thing, but it works. That's the main thing. And one next step for us is figuring out what codes we need to essentially manually enter into some records that we don't get from EBSCO. Like a lot of our databases we've cataloged ourselves, but there is a license somewhere. And if we can put the right code in the right place, we can fetch that license as well and dish out that. Any questions?
Wait, so how would you put the code, if it's not an EBSCO, what would the code be referred to?
There is probably a record in EBSCO for it, even if we're not bringing the mark record for it. So in EBSCO So we've got both like databases that we hand catalog, we've got some collections, particularly like ebooks, where we get the MARC records from either directly from the publisher or a different source. And in those cases, we've checked off here like exclude from MARC export. Or we've never activated like a database that is just one thing that you go to that doesn't have titles in it. We generally wouldn't even have activated it at all. But if we can find, so there's some work to do. There's like a project to do to map sort of our database list stuff in and figure out what we may need to do to link that up. But the databases aren't stuff that like ILL staff generally are looking for in terms of use. And like it's the priority of that project is pretty low, but I think we'd like to get it set up just so we know how to do that, particularly for then things like the ebooks where we do know periodically people are going to those terms of use, but we don't have that automatic linkage. And so that was the thing we asked for when we set up the MARC record feed from EBSCO when we switched from ProQuest to EBSCO knowledge base was, and ProQuest had been doing the same thing that powered this same service previously in our old environment. But it gets, and that was pretty, I don't think it was major effort for EBSCO to include that, it just didn't normally make sense to anyone before to have it included in their records. Anything else?
I was gonna ask about usage, but you already answered that, you're not sure, but that's really interesting.
Right, it's probably countable, I think, like,
Right.
I can talk to our Blacklight folks at some point and say, like, these pages, is there a way to sort of figure out how much they're used?
The specific rules, like, you had language, like, is it copyable, yes, to a reasonable amount, or something like that? Is that a controlled vocabulary of text, of answers, such that you could do some analytics on that, or do API requests against that field, and, if you had some other app, and wanted to know how many things were copyable to a certain amount,
Yes, and I believe with shifting from the LDP to MetaDB, which we're in the process of, I think more of the ERM tool data, which hasn't been in LDP so far, is going to be surfaceable, so we can actually build reports that check basically check that series of events that make the API call work, but in a report form to see like we're counting all the guesses by journal essentially, which we don't have a spreadsheet of or anything like that. And all the no's or all the where do we have non-disclosure clauses or various other pieces of the puzzle. So some of it we can do like license by license, we can do it within Folio searching. And we standardize some of the language ourselves for our environment, and it's a lot of it's yes, no, or yes and kinds of statements, where we just try to make it so it's relatively easy to take whatever language is in the license and figure out, oh, it's this value in what we're dishing out.
it seems like there should be some metadata standard for those questions, because those questions seem like they wouldn't be exactly the same for every license, but there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
I'm ignorant about this.
There was an attempt to, was it Ermi? I think, well, to essentially have a standard of at least most of the important to libraries license terms. Yeah, that I think no publisher particularly picked up on it because, I don't know, it was like asking them to do something that didn't particularly give them payback they could see. And because it would have required them to put their licenses into a particular format that then do they have to edit both the sort of data version of that and the text version if we get them to change something, things like that. So some of that though, some of that survives in sort of the default, what are the terms that like Folio out of the box has available for us to pick and choose a little bit. ProQuest did the same thing. They're like, oh, here's a list of stuff libraries are interested in. We'll put that in as the default patterns, but then we make them customized.
Maybe show the list, like, so we have something like this in SFX, or well, we had it in Coral. And it looks like I was just checking to see whether or not, but we're moving to the Folio URL, or we partially moved, but we still have the license terms from Coral showing up on our SFX menu. And so I know how it worked in Coral, I'm just wondering what it looks like in Folio.
Is
So-
this,
Okay,
and what you're looking for,
yeah,
so,
yes, exactly.
yeah, in that, or which I can't remember the name of the attempted standard, I think it maybe became a best practice document or something maybe. We edited the names of stuff a bit, but some of those were, it was like, ILL secure, electronic, or something was the sort of code for that field. We renamed some based on what we, making it as more human readable as possible. But for the most part, the default values there in the city, but we can also add any number of custom new ones that we want. Like we're starting to add things like it's text and data mining permissible in there, which wasn't a thing we needed to articulate back when the people that did that committee work did. We have one about non-disclosure clauses, because that's the thing we care about. And a random other restrictions one, non-disclosure clause present. What's that? We got another relatively new one, I think. Probably only should. AI clauses around when AI restrictions or permissions are included in the license. And those will be ones we want to surface, I think, so that if anyone cares, we can say, hey, we tried to make our users aware of this. We can't watch every single thing they do. But yeah, I think once we can start to get the e-resource data, so agreements, hopefully e-holdings, some of that data, and licenses in our reporting tools, we should be able to build that kind of thing, like review sort of what's our status essentially on ILL permissions or various other things to a title level, not just a license level. Because a license, like the license may represent one journal, or it might be 3,000 Elsevier journals or something like that. And help us figure out sort of our bang for our buck of where to fight or cool stuff like that.
Was there ever any question about whether or not it was okay to show these terms to the public, like not have the research staff only?
We have always done it to the public for these, like the non-disclosure clause statement, we actually don't have showed as a public. But so in all of our licenses that have a non-disclosure clause, they also say you will make your users aware of these terms of use, and you will not share these terms of use. And like, okay, but so we put the stuff that's kind of relevant for them to see. They don't need to see sort of our back office value judgments.
So that's something we should change. Should we always make it public that we
That
talk
there's
about this thing? You know, 'cause that's, you know, a little poke we could do if people are required to do this, right?
It's possible, we should talk about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't think any of the publishers that have a non-disclosure clause would get mad at us for putting things like, can we do ILL with this, can we do these other things in a publicly viewable thing, because we have also signed an agreement that said we'll make sure our users abide by these things that we can visibly share some of with them. But whether should we put our pricing when we can, like when we're not bound by a non-disclosure clause. Right. And yeah, that would get out of date unless we update it, unless we can just fetch it out of the purchase order.
Yeah.
Though we don't have title like that pricing for the basket project.
That's,
But we could say we paid us for X huge amounts of money, several bags worth, this year. We could just have it be like the restaurants on Yelp, like how many dollar signs.
I would feel like, I would feel like the unit of cost should be the undergraduate student, right? This is how many undergraduate students we have to use to license this.
Brain research is 2 of you. Just the germ. Cool, so I don't wanna eat up too much more time. Any last questions? I'm always happy to talk more about this. I agreed to do this to try to get myself a quick example I could show. That helped. And then I'll forget about it and then.
I'm excited to see what Simeon's done.
I My computer seems to have hung up.
Oh, I see.
So the question is, will you share it in your machine? Will you share it in your laptop? Yeah, usually
Okay,
let's make you a co-host.
Save presentation.
No worries. In the meantime, we'll
Stuck in the thing where cancel button doesn't work.
Oh,
work on, well, we have to wait for you to join to make you co-host, don't we? Can I revoke Jesse?
So, and.
Can I revoke your co-hostness? I revoked it, sorry.
whatever.
I revoked your co-host permissions, so I can give him to Sabrina. Okay. Sorry.
You got 10 minutes left. I mean,
I think I've got a quick PowerPoint, something that would be loads of slides that I was looking.
Hello to folks on the line. Give us 1 minute for Simeon to connect. And then we'll be sharing we'll be sharing our final lightning round of the afternoon. It's a surprise add-in.
do you have any questions, Linda?
I feel like we need Jeopardy music while we're waiting.
It's actually fairly quiet.
It was. Almost there. Oh, she pieced out. She was like, nah. No, thank you.
So, we don't have many people online.
Okay, we're recording.
Well, Linda knows where to find us.
Exactly. She's gonna miss this surprise session.
Okay, so I have to do another session, which is in right?
That's the quickest way to do it.
And then I will make you co-presenter and get right out of your way.
Yeah.
Recording in progress.
Try and kill what sound.
Done. I muted you.
You made me okay.
You are now a co-presenter. You should be able to share. And I see Linda joining us again. Okay. There you go.
There's just one problem.
What's that?
Yeah.
One,
That's a relief.
Nope, not that one. No, that'll work, right? Okay. The problem with community open source software, I'll take you on a little story. Ever since we've been going live with Folio, this poster we had up in our library has been haunting me. And it's been really annoying. So this talk is not actually about Folio. I'm just reminded of it because I happen to be at a Folio meeting. And, you know, it has these kind of things, collaborative, flexible, independent, affordable. Those words I'm all good with. They're all good Folio words. But the one that creates a lot of problems in my library is, and this I blame on Dean Kraft, who's the person who sort of helped motivate us towards this part of OLA to get us going with Folio. The interpretation of customizable to fit our library's immediate and future needs. Now, what that means to the listener in our library is you are going to get Folio to do exactly what you want in the way you want, which might be different from anyone else. I believe a large US library that was part of Folio earlier on essentially left Folio because of that belief system, that belief that, we can have it do all of what we want. And Folio isn't that. We have had a project manager at Cornell to implement Folio, Deborah Howell, who is wonderful, and also really rigorous when it comes to things. She's like, we are going to have a governance body following university regulations for this system of record. We're going to do it properly, and we are not going to change it. We're going to have it hosted by EBSCO. We're going to take the version there is. If we want something different, we're going to go through the whole community process, and we're going to work out with the community wants it, whether we get it added. This, I think, is correct and has got us to a good place with our Folio installation. But the problem is kind of pervasive through the space of library open source projects. We're all very familiar with this phrase from Mr. Twain, didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. I think the comparable version for software is, we didn't have the time and energy to work out a shared solution that was agreeable to everyone, so instead we opted for a feature-rich solution. And that has many problems. One, we don't actually take the time to review what we're doing now to see whether it's still the right thing for the next future. The lack of agreement creates these large solutions, or perhaps more alternatives that are necessary, which means that maintenance is higher. The worst case community solution is a community software that is more expensive to maintain than the sum of a set of independent solutions that you could have done on your own. Or you end up with a solution that gets forked, which takes individual communities below a sustainability threshold. So I think, the big question is, what's the scope and what's the carrying capacity of the community and the resources to support it? We have to make sure that we are realistic about our scope of any project so that it can be supported. I know things like the sustainability tools, such as the It Takes a Village tools, they tend to focus on, how to support an initiative, how to diversify funding, how to do this and that, how government structure and buy-in. And we rarely go back to question whether the solution or initiative is actually the right thing to support. And then there's always consistent underestimation, ongoing needs versus what it takes to build something. That's me. Discuss.
You're not wrong.
I guess my plea is that we should all spend more time talking about agreed solutions rather than focusing on individual needs. We are all the same.
I thought we were saying, oh, maybe flowers, each bird has their own, big species, but, that attitude needs to change before I think the games could happen.
Well, I do want to say that actually I think the Folio community is not bad in this respect compared with other library open source things I've been involved with. But yeah, we have elements of, we need to control the scope of the solution we're creating so that it is maintainable, understandable, because the other problem is kind of the word problem, right? Word is a very feature-rich word processor, which means that it's not necessarily as efficient as it could be, but many of the things you want to do, you can't find the thing you actually need, the zillions of ribbons and menus and this one.
How would you sort of rate Cornell Library in terms of your behaviors around some of this?
Well, I think I'm awesome in that respect. I think we're pretty good at reevaluating what we want to do. We are aware of the reality of the sort of maintenance part, and I think one of the things we're doing is we're trying to trim the number of different solutions we have to get them to a threshold, which is not quite the same as the scope of the solutions. And we're selective about which initiatives we're joining.
And I mean, in the Folio world, we went live pretty early. We were the first large research library to go live in the world. right, I think, and we delayed that year because we had a pretty sizable list of what we were calling showstoppers at the time. During that year, some of those got finished, others we removed from the list as like, you know what, we can manage.
Yeah,
And we
the
still
big
had
gap.
about 9, I think, when we went live, and sure enough, it did stop the show. But we took time to figure out what to do with them, and then where there have still been gaps, in some cases, we worked to sort of fund solutions that we're filling a gap, we think, for everybody, like things like single record import, and some other areas. So, I mean, I think we're willing just to try to dive in and go with what the tools got at the time. And we may still, but there's still parts where we're putting a lot of effort into trying to get made better or finished or built it all, so.
Do you think that that may be easier for you and other ARLs to do because you have large teams with expertise on the teams and maybe more challenging for the smaller libraries to behave this way?
It's hard to answer actually, because I don't have the experience of being part of a small library.
Well, that's part of the small one.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, we
Yeah.
had one live in folio in summer 2020.
Yeah.
And also accepted a lot of things that weren't ready. And this was before I was there, like, the reason, but, you know, it was a recognition of here's what's there, we're working.
Yeah.
But there was also, my predecessor did a lot of custom development around things that others are still using. But I think the flip side of that argument is the, you know, well, it's not actually the flip side. Like, yeah, there are things we shouldn't do just because we can, right? So yeah, maybe this is a feature that we typically shouldn't do because it requires a lot of custom work. But another way of looking at that is, okay, we have this number of resources, so we could do it. How would we solve it if we had fewer resources? And maybe we would try to solve it in a way that was less idiosyncratic and more common, a way that could be more communicated, right? I mean, you know, we've at Lehigh, we, the folio developers, meaning me, the folio developers, have made a few contributions to the folio. Not a lot, right? But you know,
You punch way above your weight.
well, thank you. I mean, so I mean, look at some of the schools which are bigger, you know, and I'm like, okay, so you're doing a lot more development, and it's all internal tools and things. And again, we've done that too. But if even 20% of that resource was saying, we're not gonna do that, instead, we're gonna contribute some of these, you know, central problems, the 20% from each of those folks would solve some of these things in a way that was common and less idiosyncratic. Which would probably make some of our internal staff less happy, but would also make us happy in ways that our partners would identify, because problems will be solved without us solving. We get more benefit of these things solved. You know, I remember seeing that Arla study from like a year ago of like all the different features that Arla, you know, community wanted, and like, yeah, that'll look good. And there are a lot of non-Arla groups that would like those too. So if, again, just picking a number, if 20% of the resources that went to the local idiosyncratic stuff went to that stuff, that list would disappear relatively fast.
Well, I think that was part of the work with the developer advocate, right, that we would make it easier for individual developers or smaller groups to contribute. So I mean, that'll take time. It's kind of, but before I was at Stanford, I was at a very small library. And I think that part of, I was at 2 very small libraries, and we basically worked with what we had. We didn't have any money. We didn't have any developers. And we worked with what we were given, but we also had, we were bringing in, you know, we had a $200,000 book budget, as opposed to Stanford, which has 25 million. And so the amount of stuff we were bringing in was so much less. So if we had to do a few workarounds, we had to do a few workarounds. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't a big deal. So, I mean, it was a big deal, but it wasn't, we weren't dealing with the kind of a larger institution. So I think it was, you know, if you're at a school that doesn't have a lot of money, doesn't spend a lot of money, you're just kind of used to having to do what needs to be done, but it's very different. It's like Stanford where we have the expectation that we have what is expected from us, you know, by our, students and faculty there's high expectations, and so we have to figure out a way to, you know, quickly, and with high quality, so it's just different.
I think our larger libraries also, we have more people that do kind of one big thing
Yes.
as their regular job, and more basically, not necessarily time, but like expertise in a way to sort of come up with other ways this could or should work versus like tackling with tool you've got. Like, so yeah, like I think we've got people articulating how they would like it to be, and there's a lot of them saying there's slightly different angles.
I think there is actually a flip side to that though. Because we have a lot of staff and a lot of them are focused on different aspects, you sometimes speak to people from smaller organizations where a staff member has sort of a greater view over operations, and they can think of alternative solutions in a way that our structure doesn't encourage.
Right, but I'm saying it in a way,
Yeah,
like it means we end up with this bulky thing because it's solving
yeah.
10 different people's one job they do. Yeah, cool. Yeah, and they're like, oh, we wouldn't have time to bother doing that.
Right.